Hey everyone, welcome. Welcome to the Customer Success webinar series. I'm Scott Slomba, Head of Customer Success at Komprise. And with me is Paul Chen, who heads up our product management team at Komprise. And this week we have a special guest, Steve Moore, who is our information architect and leads our alliance team. This week we're going to be talking about analytics. Before we get going, one reminder, a couple of logistics. Reminder is that the intent of this webinar series is for existing customers to get an update on some of the new things that are going on in Komprise, some of the best practices. You're all customers, so this is not a sales pitch, not a marketing pitch. It's purely a nuts and bolts discussion on how to make better use of the product to get the most out of your subscription. And some logistics. Go to the next slide here. If you haven't figured it out, on the upper right-hand corner, you can enlarge your screen to full screen. So that gives you a better viewing experience. There's also some assets on the right hand. If you look at on the paperclip icon on the right, you've got some artifacts. We want to keep this interactive. You cannot ask questions audibly, but you can ask questions through the chat. So there's a little question mark button on the right. So please use that. It does really help with the richness of the conversation by asking questions. So please don't hesitate. And then people always ask, are the past recordings recorded? Is this going to be recorded? And yes, it is. They're all recorded. Past recordings are either at the registration site, or you can go to our support portal, and there's a link to get over there then. This week, let's see. Forward the slides here. We're going to talk about analysis I mentioned. Got some questions, some overview, demonstration, etc. So on previous webinars, you've seen us promote the analysis users guide. And Steve Moore is actually the author of that guide. So he's the one who's going to be presenting best practices and demos and whatnot. He's also told me that he's got a lot to tell you guys, so I'm not going to waste a lot more time here, and I'm just going to turn it right over to Steve at this point.
Thank you, Scott. And then what I'm going to do is just take over the screen here for you.
Okay.
And to that end, what we've got here and what we're going to do today is not so much give you the sales pitch, is just show you some practical ways to use the interface to be able to understand your data and data sets. You see these screens, you see the information. Hopefully we'll give you a little bit about why some of this is here and how to use some of this information that's being presented for you. And hopefully introduce you to a few new things about Komprise along the way too. And so really what we're going to focus on today really is this plan analysis section here on the right. Our famous data donut that we've got here, our heat map for the data. We're going to talk about the data, the usage, the space briefly, and the analysis activity type information that's there, and give you a little bit of touch on the edit cost model and how some of that's leveraged as well. So hopefully this will be familiar for you, but on the other hand, hopefully we'll be able to provide some new insights as to way to leverage this more effectively, to be able to show you that rather than having to use all these different tools to try and collect some of this information, from different vendors and try and correlate it and everything, Komprise just makes it easy by bringing, a standard view across all your platforms that are there. And you guys know this already. So one of the key things to kind of point out real quick is two controls that you have on this interface. These are very important. There's the filter control in the upper right here. And this allows you to have that view across all the shares that you've enabled for Komprise to analyze. So that's your big view, all the way down to specific shares, where I could drill into just one share in particular and see information about that particular share for the environment. You may be familiar with these already. Another way to use this tool that I find really helpful is to be able to choose from the specific groups. And you see here what we have is these groupings from the left over here that we've done in our plan. So you can have multiple plans for the environment, and then you can set up these groups, and these groups might be by common activity, like I'm going to tier these shares to an object store somewhere, or they might be grouping by functionalities, maybe different departments and stuff. And so we can have different plans with different groupings, and we can also then filter rather than all shares or specific shares, but we could look at these by groups. And this filter is impacting the information that we're going to see on this data tab, obviously. on this usage tab, space tab, and analysis activity tab too. So this one gives you a really great tool to kind of like the knob of the microscope, zoom in or zoom out for your environment and how you want to see the information. And this also can impact things, not just the heat map, the charts, the graphs, but also the cost model and how you do some price comparisons down below here too. Another important tool is the date ranges that we have down below. We have these default buckets of, less than 1 month to 3 years in the system. And these date ranges are changed over here on the system and settings page. And I've used these in different environments to take a look at the dates for customers that are important to them. If you have a retention period, say your max is 7 years, then we can see how much data is greater than 7 years and look at maybe what a 5-year bucket might look like, a 3-year bucket. So we can choose these to kind of match up all the way down to 1 week if we need to see how much data is in these different sections. And we can apply that to our environment. Another way I've used this was a customer was asking, well, I've got to kind of project some growth and stuff. How could I look at data over, how much is in each bucket for a year? So, we could do, less than 1 month, do 3 months, 6 months, make this one 1 year, for example, or 9 months. Let's do that. Let's make this one 9 months and then make this one 1 year. So we can kind of see how much data is in each of these different buckets. And then we might make this one like 2 years. So again, this is going to impact the data that we're going to see on the data tab, the usage tab, the analysis activity tab. So these give you great controls for viewing the data. You want to see it your way. But if you just want the defaults that we have, just do restore defaults, save the information off, and it'll be back to that way on the main page. Now, something I've kind of noticed as well is sometimes these buckets don't quite catch up with that. So just a quick refresh on the page will catch these buckets up with the changes that you've made, and you're on your way. So it's a bit of a cached value in there. But here's where we can start to organize the data in this heat map in a way that makes sense to our business and what our business goals are and what our objectives are, or the objectives for the conversation, and we can reconfigure it for a different conversation. Building on from there, we can come over to the usage tab. Now, the great thing in the usage tab is it gives you these summary charts to be able to have a quick conversation about space. And you've seen these before. And you see this tab is awesome to have a conversation about data types as well as applications, because a SQL database makes files of a certain type, and those files will show up in here. Your email server, again, makes files of certain types, and they'll show up in here. So here's where you can kind of see the correlation between the data types that you have out there and the applications that you're running on the shares that we've selected for this filter. So you see, if I change it from specific groups to all shares, then the range will change and the numbers will change. Now, as you guys have known and probably seen in our simulator environments, we have the same basic curve layout for all of our simulated data that's in the environment. But if I were to choose my filter between, say, marketing and engineering, different data sets would be showing up in here for these different categories. Now that we kind of understand what kind of data we have here, and so we can then move on to figuring out file size. And this is really a key file for making several decisions about data management. First off is looking at it by file size and by capacity. So this is giving you information about the different files and the capacity that are out there. And lo and behold, large files consume most of the capacity. So that makes common sense, right? Where does this come into value in terms of data management and planning? Well, it comes into play if you're looking at doing maybe tiering. Where can I get my biggest return on freeing space on my on-prem NAS system by moving data off to the cloud for lower cost storage, for example? And you'll see the biggest bang for the buck in this case is going to be files that are probably 10 megabyte or larger in size. So as we're doing tiering, this is probably where we'd want to start. And then we can also see, is it 3-year files that are going to give us a big return? Is it, greater than 2 years or greater than 1 year? We can see a bit about that in the information, but here's where we can start to make some decisions about that. But another great use of this very same graph is to switch it from size to file count. And so now you see we've changed down here from capacities to numbers of files. And lo and behold, as you would expect, small files, there's more small files than there are large files. Now, when it comes to tiering, I could tier all these small files, but I'm not going to get that capacity return for all the work and administration of going through all that. It's like trying to count up your pennies. You know, you need them to get $1 million, but counting it penny by penny is going to take forever. And so where these small files really come into play is when you're starting to make some decisions about moving data I want to move off. So these may not be really great candidates, and we're not going to see a lot of benefits from tiering them. But when it comes to migrations, if these bottom rows here, say, the 10 KB or smaller, are really your longest bars over to the right, that means you have tons of tiny files out there. And we'll want to have a conversation before we start moving data with our end customers about movement rates and movement times and things. So we're setting the right expectations. And that's the big thing about migrations. Once you start moving data for those sorts of things, the inspection's on, the heat's on, and everybody's watching and wanting to know when it's going to be done. So it's better to have a conversation up front about the fact that very small files can be very chatty, can take a while to move over. That's probably the worst case scenario for migrations. So good to know about that before you get into the migration rather than finding out afterwards. So again, you can leverage these graphs in several different ways to leverage great conversations, or maybe we've noticed that video files is our biggest one. So let's go back to size here and let's see who's using the most of those. Well, A best here. Let's go talk to Albert about why he has so many video files on his system. Maybe he's over in engineering and they really shouldn't have video files. So maybe he's got his whole DVD collection out there that is stored on the system. Or maybe he is in manufacturing and he has all those cameras, from the manufacturing line as product has gone through that he needs to store. But the question might be how long? That kind of data ages very quickly, and we can probably move it off after a few days. To give it that long-term storage and stuff. So here's where we can start to identify key people and key groups to go and have conversations about storage management. And you're armed with information before talking to them about the kind of data they have, the ages of their data, the amounts of data, numbers of files, and things like that. So rather than just saying, hey, could you free space? You could say, hey, I see you've got 23 terabytes older than 3 years of video data. How is this really helping our business and how are we looking to move forward? So this information itself can be really helpful in structuring a conversation and looking at data management and things. So I'm going to pass it back over to Paul and Scott again for a quick question, or a poll, I think.
Actually, Paul, I think you had the poll teed up.
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
Thanks, Steve, for that intro. We do have a poll question now. Over in the right panel, you'll see sort of a bar chart. And I'm going to open a question now. If you could quickly give it a glance. We're curious, when you are using those usage charts, obviously we're giving you aggregate data, how many video files, how much space they're consuming. But do you find that you ever need to know the exact files? Is it useful to say, find out where are those files, what are they? And then when you go talk to ABEST, you can show him some information. Look, we found these files. They seem to be owned by you. What's going on here? So let us know with the poll. I'll leave it open for a few moments.
I'll just stop sharing to see if that helps.
I have to press the start poll button. I apologize. Too many controls. All right, the poll is now open. We'll leave it for a few moments.
And are you seeing it? Because I'm not seeing it.
You've opened the poll tab. It says it's open. Scott, are you seeing it?
Well, I think as a presenter, Steve and I might see what you're seeing, Paul. Let me just.
Okay. I'm getting some responses in now.
Okay.
Fantastic.
And just as a sort of a spoiler alert, if you do need to see the exact files, Komprise can help you with that. We have a feature in the product, which we're not going to discuss today. We can in the future, and we have talked about in the past. Our deep analytics feature, which leverages our global file index, can give you exactly the files in those categories. And of course, even more. You can run your own queries across your data and be able to see the exact files, even up to tens of millions. That's possible.
Now, while they're on the polling, I'm going to share screen and go on to the next part here while they finish up. That's good.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, so another tab that we have in our system is, hold on there, let me get to where this is showing, is the space tab. And the way I use the space tab is obviously you can see the different systems and the amount of capacities on them, and how much space we've tiered and other things. But what I find most helpful in this is when we last did the analysis of the system. And you see here on 12:08 at 5:28 p.m., our last scan of the storage system ended. So our information that we're showing in data and usage is not real time. It's based on our last scan of the environment. And here's a way where you can go and locate and see when that last scan was. So 12:08 was about a week ago. We did a scan of the environment, and we're probably due for another one. So if you know that somebody has gone along and put a lot of data onto one of these particular systems, you can go over to shares and go and identify that share itself, and then do a rescan of that environment for the environment to get the updated data and everything for the environment itself. So you see here, we'll go and we'll restart that analysis, and that information will catch up, and we can track some of its progress through this little arrow here, and then we can also track its progress back over here with space and looking at how it's doing on its completion. So this is one I use to kind of see how current the data is that we're showing in the plan and usage area. And then a really important section for us is this analysis activity section. And so the data usage and the space and the graphs and the charts all give you information about the data itself. But an important thing to understand before you start taking actions with a lot of your data is the health of your data. Is it in a viable state? Is it something I can work with? And my little simulator environment doesn't really give me a lot of examples for this. So what I'm going to do is switch over to some slides and kind of show you this section. But what you should see in your environment is that we scan for about 20, 30 different items in your environment. And we show those items when we find them. We don't show them all of the time. So you'll see that there will be these 5 different sections that'll show up through here on the analysis activity portion. And then you can go on to choose the section itself, such as the analysis metrics. We can open it up and we can see information. Are there symbolic links? Why is that important? Well, different systems support symbolic links different ways. So depending upon the platform you're going to, it's important to know whether the symbolic links may move over or not. Those are file system components. We want to make sure they make it there. Are there sparse files? How do the different systems store sparse files? Do they condense them down? Do they take the zeros out when they put it on the space, or is it stored in logical size? So are there comprised symbolic links? Might be another thing that will show up in here. If we've done some tiering, we'll show you that information in here as well. And we can start to get a feel for the average file size for the environment and the average size of the directories. These can be important factors to know, again, when we come to doing migrations and other things too. So remember to check over here in this environment to learn more about the health of these files and the sizes for them. Another section that we have in here shows us the default exclusions. There's some things that aren't worth counting, and we're not going to be moving them from one platform to another because they're vendor specific, or they're just temp files from an OS perspective or things like that. Or we may have set up an exclusion, like in the tiering, files smaller than a certain size, like in that previous example, 10 megabytes, we don't need to tier. So we might find some of those exceptions for some of these things, some of these exclusions that are in here. We can find cycles in directories, whereas directories point to subdirectories who point back to parent directories that make a loop. So we're not, counting those numbers and things. We have a listing of those, down below in the bottom that you'll see. So there's a number of things that we show in the environment that, again, are good to know before you start moving. Another really important one is this analysis failures. And so over here, you'll start to see where we had troubles being able to collect information on attributes, directories, files, folders. A great example of that is orphan data. Data where employees have left the company, their SIDs and GUIDs are no longer valid, and we aren't able to get to them. Another example is I've worked in a lot of university environments. Students have gone in, or professors have gone in and changed the permissions and access of their different folders, directories, and things. They wanted to block everybody out and stuff. So again, all this sort of stuff you'd like to know before you start moving data and moving your information. Another thing that kind of freaks me out all the time is you'll see this little 100% down here. This is, largely most of the errors are this user resolution. And so that's not 100% of the file system or the file space. So just a little tip from me, something that I see in the environment. But again, here's a great area to check before you start moving data to make sure that our access credential has full access to the data and able to read and analyze that space. Another one is crazy long path names. Sometimes people write characters, paragraphs for path names. It's, projects, names, places, locations, times. They pump as much information into the directory, the path name, and the file name as there is. And here again, different file systems support different numbers of characters as well as different storage platforms. So rather than being in the midst of a migration or something and then learning, halfway through that you've got this crazy issue to deal with, you can deal with it up front and address it and then make sure everything's clean before you begin. Another one's unsupported characters. Had one video company, they were using emojis in their file names and things like that. So you want to be able to find these characters and these issues early beforehand. Again, here's another great way to identify if we have tons of those tiny files and what the percentage of the environment is of tiny files. So again, we can set expectations. So leverage these things to understand the health of your environment and understand what's happening in there before you jump into moving data. Another good one is, what's good files for tiering and size or large file transfers. Another couple more is, did we see some slowness when we were doing the analysis? Maybe this particular share, we've got some network issues getting to, or it's not performing the best, or quite often we're asked to migrate on systems that are over 80% full. So again, things you'd want to know about beforehand because this could impact the performance and throughput of things. Another one is tons of tiny directories and more, or directories with very few files in them, or empty directories. A lot of automated systems that create and capture logs and things, maybe they've created the directory for that day, but there really wasn't any results for that day. So they have a lot of empty directories in there. Things that can really impact performance because, again, there's a lot of chatter back and forth across the wire, the WAN, the network to be able to create these directories only to end up not really putting any data or using them. So there's a lot of great reports that are available, a lot of things that we'll look for that'll show up in those sections that can provide a lot of great information as you're doing your data management planning and as you're looking at different sources and destinations to be able to move data to and from and stuff. I'll pause here and hand it back to Scott and Paul to see if they want to do another poll.
Thanks, Steve. Yep, perfect time for another poll. Steve's gone very quickly through a lot of the capabilities and information on the analysis activity tab. We have a poll question that I'll start now. We were just curious, for people who are using that tab, which are the most popular areas that they find useful? Is it analysis metrics? Is it insights into the reported numbers? Data to be excluded if you're running a move plan optimization, how to get the best bang out of the buck of archiving your data, or insights into the analysis rate. What is holding up analysis? So the poll is open. We'll keep it open for a bit longer. But I think, Steve, in the interest of time, you can probably keep going and I'll leave the poll open. People can think about it, give some responses.
Okay. I'm going to cover one more section for us here today, and then we'll get close to wrapping up and kind of touch on a few other items that we have that kind of relate to this, such as deep analytics and things. So we've looked at the system. We've talked about how you can gather information and go and have conversations with your end users and your departments about the space they're using, how we can organize some of that data by using different plans and doing our grouping and stuff to be able to tie those in together. Another is to be able to bring along this edit cost model down here and have a conversation. And maybe this is a conversation both with your executive team as well as end users about what it costs to actually own data. And this is a big key. It's not the acquisition costs of storage, it's the data ownership costs. So we want to go beyond just what was the price per terabyte for a raw RAID volume. That's an important number to know. It's an important number to know when you're acquiring a system and doing comparisons between storage subsystems. But those systems themselves, you have to go and you have to format them, and they've got to load their OS onto them, and then they've got to take space away for rating capabilities. So the formatting and loading their OS might take a couple of percentage points away from the overall capacity. Doing the RAID calculations can take anywhere from 20 to 50% of the capacity away. We're going to carve some space out for snapshots. There's another 10, 15% taken away. So at the end of the day, what might have started as a petabyte of storage ends up being around 400, 500 terabytes of actual usable space. So although my cost per terabyte of the physical platform was fairly low, by the time we account for all these usage of those systems, our actual ownership cost of the storage hardware per usable terabyte turns out to be a much higher number than what many people realize. And we have a couple of tools that kind of walk you through some questions like this to kind of help figure some of those numbers out. And then if you're going to go on to compare it against, say, a cloud NAS system, you could even go even farther and say, well, what about, my cost for rack space, my cost for power, cooling, those sorts of things too. But don't get caught in analysis paralysis. Don't get chasing numbers all day that you don't make a decision. But also an ownership cost is that we have to protect that data. So we have to back it up. We have to, maybe DR it and that sort of stuff. So here's an opportunity for you to kind of account for some of those scenarios. Maybe we're doing DR and we're doing another identical system somewhere that that ends up costing us 700 terabytes of space as well. So we can account for that. And then we have some software because, DR and synchronous or asynchronous replication and stuff is another feature, another add-on for the environment. So maybe we have, some software costs for that too. So really to own a terabyte of data, to keep it on the original storage, to mirror it, to have the software to do that really ends up costing us around $1,800 a terabyte a year, just picking some numbers at random. But now if I were to move it over to, say, a cloud system or an on-prem system, I could do some comparative costs. I could do like another NAS system and put some numbers in for that. And for some reason, my keyboard doesn't want to quite work right. And then I might have, some Komprise costs for moving that data and doing tiering, or I could do tiering to the cloud or a NAS system in the cloud and put the cost of that storage, the cost of Komprise to move some of that data. Maybe there's an egress cost, maybe there's not. So we could do a comparison of keeping data there, having them in their regional zones, having all the protections and the multiple nines of availability they have in these different platforms. So try and bring it to apples as you can, but be able to have that conversation about comparing the costs. And so now that we know some costs, let's take those costs and apply it against the capacities that we know about. And here again is where you can leverage the tool in a couple of different ways. I can come over here and choose edit, and I can choose now, and I can choose that I want to look just at this remote offices group. Remember, these things all kind of data that we're looking at. So now we've drilled down, just remote offices is 832 terabytes of space. We did our cost model to say what our on-prem costs were. We did our cost model to say what an alternative storage cost platform might be. So let's make that 500. And then I'll put $1 in here and we'll do save. And now we can come down to our little graph below here and we can see the cost of business as usual in the gold here. It's showing us that we're growing at about 18%. We have this much capacity that we're looking at managing. In a year, it will grow out to 900 terabytes. In 3 years, it'll grow out to 1.3 petabytes at this growth rate. Keeping it on-prem is going to cost us 1.7 million. If we were to move it over to another platform, it could cost us 1.4 million. So $300,000 in savings switching over the platforms from one to the other. So that was if I was to do a forklift replacement. But if I were to come along and do tiering and say, look at data that's 6 months or older, then we can see how much data that is by looking at the purple stripe on the inside here. So again, for these remote offices, for tiering cold data older than 6 months at these price rates, and then let's say the cloud cost for tiering going to object store is a bit cheaper, so we'll make that one $300 a terabyte and do save on this one. Then we can see it applied to the cost savings here, and we start to see the difference, come on down, in the two graphs. So now we have the on-prem cost, remember before was 1.7 million, but now we have some on-prem costs because we removed about 72% of the space from on-prem. If we had deployed it from the beginning using a bit of on-prem and a bit of cloud, we would only be at the combination of about $700,000, so $1 million less than if we'd done the full on-prem solution. So that's money that could be put into other things like security and other platforms and other applications and other engineers and development and tools as well. And you see how these numbers are working against the actual real data amounts that you have. So whether you want to look at pricing out a forklift upgrade or looking at pricing, some tiering and what you might do for that, here's a way for you to be able to leverage the filter to identify the systems. I could drill down to look just at one system instead of multiple systems. So this one system is 548 terabytes. The one system keeping the data on it, drops to $1.1 million in a year versus, doing it with some tiering and stuff. And the amount of data on that one system is still around 70% because our data is fairly homogeneous in size and environment. But you see how you can leverage these tools to kind of have those pricing conversations. I believe as storage moves forward, and as we're making that change from an all hardware, dump it all in one big bucket type evolution over to where we're going to have data mobility, we're going to have some in the cloud, some of on-prem, some we're working with, you need to be able to not only look at what the data is, who's using it, and what the health of it is, but also be able to look at what the ownership cost of that data is and be able to do comparisons. If I move it from here to there, what's my ROI? How can I show that in a quick way? So we see we're providing the tools in the interface for you to be able to have some of those conversations. And we went through a lot of stuff fairly quickly. So remember, you always have your Komprise Systems Engineer to work with and your Komprise Customer Success Engineer to work with too. So we're here to kind of help field some questions and help you understand the tools. And we have where we can capture these reports, capture these information down into some PDFs, into some CSVs that you can leverage in your proposals and your explanations to your management chain and that sort of stuff too, to be able to talk about space, ownership costs, capacity amounts, and see what these screenshots look like and where the numbers are that's behind them and how all that kind of matches up and everything too. So you have a number of reports that you can pull for these environments as well. Now, this was all great information. And just to kind of remind you, this gives you a baseline that really covers a lot of what customers have been requesting of us in the near term for some quick understanding of their environment and preparations for things like tiering and data migrations and whatnot. But customers do want to go the extra level. Remember, we do collect all that metadata information. If you go to like your Windows Explorer, do right click in properties, you'll see there's things like the directory path, the file name, the access dates, the types, extension size, owner groups. Remember, we've collected all that into Elastic Database that you can build these customized queries, and you can come in and view where those files are, who owns them, and get even more details. And so we'll cover that in a deeper session for you at another time. But just wanted to remind you that we have that analysis for that quick understanding, giving you those templates, and then you have these deep analytics for really drilling in and being able to do these customized queries and be able to identify even more specifically where those orphan files are. We talked about those earlier. They have unidentified things. I don't have any examples of them in our little sample base here, but here's where I could list them out, go see them, and go do a report on them and get them addressed and that sort of stuff too. So I'm going to pull back to the plan section here and just open the floor to Paul and Scott again.
Thanks, Steve. Very, very comprehensive and quick overview of all the capabilities that we have for analysis. We are over time. We had another poll question, but we'll skip that in the interest of letting you guys go back to your days. Thank you very much. Scott, over to you.
Yeah, just a final thing. Yes, we are over time. But for the folks left, just a heads up, this is the last webinar of the year, but we will be picking this up starting in 2023. We've had a lot of demand. For anybody who's still left on the call, if you have any specific topics you'd like to cover or for upcoming topics for upcoming webinars, please submit that into the question mark button to the right. So just throw that in there. That'll be extremely helpful. Again, reminder that these are recorded, all these sessions. So you get a link here, basically the support portal. There's a link into where the recordings are. So you can always follow up or pass this along to other folks who might find this interesting. And with that, that'll conclude the webinar and it'll conclude the series for 2022. Have a great holidays, everybody. Thanks.
Take care.
Thank you all.